The midday sun scorched the vast Montana prairie, turning the golden grass into brittle shards that crunched underfoot like fragile bones. The sky arched endlessly above, a faded blue canvas stretched taut, unbroken by clouds or mercy. Heat waves danced on the distant horizon, distorting the line where earth met sky, and the air hung thick with the dry scent of baked soil and wild sage. In the midst of this unforgiving expanse stood a weathered cabin, its timber walls bleached silver by relentless seasons, standing defiant against the isolation of the American frontier. Cicadas buzzed in a relentless chorus, there droned a weary reminder of the land's indifference to human struggle. Elias Hawthorne sat on the sagging porch, his worn boots hooked on the lower step, a battered Stetson pulled low over eyes etched with lines from squinting into too many sunsets. His rifle rested against the rail, a constant companion in this lawless stretch near the town of Bitter Creek, where the Rocky Mountains loomed like silent judges to the west. Elias was a man forged by solitude, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of years spent ranching alone after the fever took his family a decade ago. The silence of the prairie had seeped into him, making his movements deliberate, his words sparse. He expected nothing from the day but the routine grind, tending his few cattle, mending fences, letting the hours bleed into one another until night claimed them. The first sign of disruption was the uneven scrape of footsteps, faint at first, like a wounded animal dragging itself through the dust. Elias tilted his head, listening past the cicadas. Then came the whimper, a child's soft, broken sob that no beast could mimic. His hand tightened on the rifle stock as he rose slowly, scanning the wavering heat. A figure emerged from the hay, staggering along the faint trail that led from the distant road. It was a woman, young, perhaps mid-20s, but her frame was gaunt, her steps faltering as if each one borrowed strength from a well long dry. Her cotton dress, once blue, now hung in tatters, streaked with dirt and dried blood, clinging to her sweat-slicked skin. One arm cradled a small girl, no older than 5, whose bare feet left bloody prints in the earth, her face smeared with grime and tears. The woman reached the porch and collapsed against the steps with a gasp that tore from her throat like a plea. She slid down, her body folding in exhaustion, the child tumbling beside her, clutching at her mother's skirts with tiny dirt-caked fists. Elias's rifle clattered to the boards as he stood frozen, his heart thudding against ribs that suddenly felt too tight. He hadn't touched another soul in years, not since burying his kin. The woman's face was a map of brutality, swollen eye, black and purple, lips split and crusted, cheeks hollowed by hunger or fear. Bruises bloomed along her exposed arms, fingerprints of cruelty pressed into pale skin. The child lifted her head, wide eyes red-rimmed but fierce, staring up at him with a mix of terror and desperate resolve. Something shattered inside Elias, the girl whispered, a barrier he'd built like grief and isolation, but we need help, cracking under the weight of those words. His hands, calloused from rope and rain, trembled as he knelt. The air between them smelled of sweat and desperation, mingled with the faint metallic tang of blood. He reached out, hesitant, his shadow enveloping them like a reluctant shield. The woman stirred weakly, her eyelids fluttering, lips parting in a silent protest, but her body betrayed her, slumping. Further, Elias scooped her up, her weight feather-light yet burdensome with implication, her head lolling against his shoulder. The child, Irene, she would later say, scrambled after him, her small hand fisting his pant leg as he carried her mother across the threshold into the dim cabin. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the scent of pine sap from the walls and the faint smokiness of last night's fire. Elias laid the woman on his narrow cot, the thin mattress sagging under her. He adjusted the rough wool blanket, tucking it around her frail form, noting how her breaths came shallow, each inhale rasping like wind through dry leaves. Her skin was clammy under his touch, feverish perhaps from exposure or infection. The bruises told a story he recognized from whispers and bitter. Creek men who claimed ownership with fists, women who fled only to be dragged back. Rage flickered in his chest, hot and unbidden, stirring embers he'd thought long cold. The girl hovered at the bedside, her knuckles white on the frame, face blotched with exhaustion. "Don't let Mama die," she commanded in a whisper that held more steel than her years should allow. Elias met her gaze, those eyes too old for her face, and nodded once, the gesture of vow he hadn't planned to make. He fetched water from the bucket by the stove, dipping a rag and pressing it to the woman's forehead. Droplets traced paths down her temples, mingling with sweat. Her arms, exposed as the blanket shifted, bore older marks, faded yellows overlaying fresh purples, a chronicle of endured violence. Whoever had done this viewed her as property, Elias thought, his jaw clenching until it ached. The girl climbed onto the bed, curling into her mother's side, her small body a protective curve. "Her name's Mama," she said firmly, as if daring him to challenge it. Then softer, "I'm Clara." Elias crouched to her level, his knees creaking, his face, rough-bearded and sun-leathered, softening in a way it hadn't since before the graves. "Safe here," he murmured, voice gravelly from disuse. "No harm." Clara studied him, weighing his words against whatever horrors she'd seen, then nodded, burrowing closer to her mother. Elias stepped back to the porch, the sun now dipping lower, casting long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the prairie. His eyes swept the horizon, sharp and vigilant, half expecting dust clouds from pursuing riders. The land was empty, but he knew trouble didn't announce itself. It slithered in under cover of night or bold daylight. Behind him, Clara's soft murmurs filtered through the open door, her hands smoothing her mother's hair. Elias gripped the porch rail, splinters biting his palms, the knot in his throat unfamiliar after years of numbness. The cabin, once a tomb of solitude, now pulsed with fragile life, and with it came a responsibility that settled heavy on his shoulders. Fell, the cicada's song swelled, a symphony of persistence in the cooling air. Elias built a fire in the hearth, the crackle of kindling chasing shadows from the walls. He warmed broth from his meager stores, potatoes and dried beef, simmered with wild onions, and spooned it carefully into a bowl for Clara. The girl ate greedily at first, then slowed, her eyes darting to her mother. The woman, still nameless to him, stirred once, her hand twitching as if warding off a phantom blow. Elias watched from the corner, his own meal forgotten, the steam rising from his tin cup, curling like unanswered questions. Night deepened, stars pricking the black sky like distant fires. Elias sat in his chair by the window, rifle across his lap, listening to the wind whisper through cracks in the walls. Clara slept beside her mother, their breaths sinking in uneasy harmony. He dozed fitfully, jolted awake by every creak, his mind replaying the day's intrusion. Why his door? The prairie was vast. She could have collapsed anywhere. Yet here she was, a storm blown in, upending his quiet exile. Morning broke with a chill that belied the coming heat, thin light filtering through the cabin's single window. Dew clung to the grass outside, sparkling briefly before the sun burned, made away. The woman stirred first, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the color of storm clouds, wary, haunted. She tried to sit, wincing as pain lanced her side, her hand pressing against ribs that felt like shattered glass under skin. Elias was at the stove, stirring oats, the metallic clink of the spoon against the pot the only sound. He didn't turn, immediately giving her space, knowing fear like hers needed room to breathe. Clara woke with a start, her face lighting at the sight of her mother awake. "Mama!" she cried, throwing thin arms around her neck. The woman, Zenith, Elias would learn, hugged, her back, her movements stiff, eyes flicking to him with guarded suspicion. Her hair, dark and tangled, fell across her bruised cheek like a veil. Elias poured water into a cup, setting it on the crate beside the bed. "Drink," he said, voice low, stepping back to avoid crowding her. She reached for it, fingers trembling, the cool tin grounding her. The water slid down her parched throat, tasting of iron from the well, a stark reminder of her vulnerability. She drained it, then set it down with a clink, her gaze meeting his. Shame burned in her eyes, mingled with defiance. "We won't stay long," she murmured, voice hoarse, cracked like dry earth. Elias shrugged one shoulder, turning back to the stove. "Stay as needed." No questions, no demands, just plain fact delivered without pity. He portioned oats into bowls, the steam carrying the faint nutty scent into the room. Clara reached for hers eagerly, but Zenith hesitated, her hand hovering. "We can't take," she began, but Elias pushed the bowl closer. "Food's for eating." His tone brooked no argument, but there was no edge to it. The scrape
only
of
the
spoons
quiet
against
insistence
tin,
of
the
a
only
man who
conversation.
understood
Hunger's
Zenith
bite. Chewed slowly, each bite a battle against nausea and pride. Her body ached with every shift, ribs protesting, arms throbbing where bruises bloomed like dark flowers. Yet beneath the fragility there was strength, the way she held her daughter's hand, the subtle lift of her chin as she met Elias's gaze. The cabin felt smaller with them in it, the air charged with unspoken histories. Later, Elias saddled his horse, a sturdy bay named Ghost, the leather creaking under his weight as he rode toward Bitter Creek. The town was a cluster of clapboard buildings, huddled against the wind, saloons and mercantiles lining the dusty main street. He needed supplies, flour, salt, perhaps salve for her wounds. As he tied Ghost to the hitching post outside the general store, whispers rippled like wind through grass. Eyes followed him, the widow at the counter stacking tins, the ranch hands loitering by the door.